Hello and welcome to the Ask About Wealth podcast. As regular subscribers and listeners know, we try and alternate our guests between entrepreneurs and those in the finance business. And today I'm delighted to welcome an entrepreneur, Brian Keane of Brian Keane Fitness. Thanks, Brian, for coming along today.
Paul, an absolute honour to be on. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, that's no problem at all. And I was looking at your bio, Brian, before we came on, and I see you're a personal trainer. You're also a business trainer. You're a digital entrepreneur. You're a best-selling author. You're a podcast host. You're an extreme endurance athlete. I mean, amazing. I mean, it does beg the question, where do you find the time to do all of these things?
It's a great starting question. It's not really time management, I find, Paul. It's more energy management. I'm very good with energy management. So even in terms of business, I've got a small team of people, and I try and spend large portions of my day in what I call my desire zone, the things that I love to do and would do for free. And then I've got my drudgery zone, the things I hate to do. We were joking with the lads before we recorded that if I had to edit my own podcast, I'd have given up after episode 3. So I either outsource or eliminate, delegate, delegate, or outsource anything that I don't enjoy doing. So that kind of frees up a lot of time to do the writing of the books, or focusing on podcast guests, or setting up apps for the fitness company, or doing these extreme challenges. So it's more kind of a little bit of time management mixed in with energy management and doing things that I would do for free, and that allows me to do more of it.
Right. Yeah, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life.
So true. Such a cliche, but I think I'm probably living proof of it. Yeah.
I was particularly interested, if I can focus in on one of those things, it's the whole business training that you do, which what's mentioned in a number of your own books is this mindset. And I was interested to ask you, I mean, a lot of our listeners are perhaps would-be entrepreneurs rather than entrepreneurs already. And I wanted to ask you, in your experience, what mindset stands in the way of people achieving their ambitions in terms of either fitness or, in this case, business?
It's an interesting question, because what I've experienced and what I see with people is sometimes a different answer. So I'll try and speak to both and hope that it provides a lot of value to the people listening. For me personally, I had a lot of imposter syndrome and negative self-talk. So my language, Paul, for things like business, but this also was true for marathon runs, bodybuilding shows, any kind of high achievement goal that I thought I could never personally achieve. And my language and dialogue was, that's something other people do. A very self-limiting thought. So I grew up in a traditional Irish household. People went and got pensionable jobs. I was a teacher, trained as a primary school teacher. That was my original career. And I thought business and entrepreneurship was something other people did. That was my language. So straight away, my mindset was completely closed off to any possibility of me walking this path. So for me personally, that's what happened. And I kind of fell into...
And where does that come from, Brian? Is that the internal voice, I fully appreciate what you're talking about there. And we all have that imposter syndrome, as you say, but is that upbringing? Is that Irish? Is it, where does that come from as far in your experience?
From my experience, we talked right before we went on air about the incredible opportunities that are out there for people in 2025. If you have a phone now, you can start a business.
Yeah.
When I was growing up in the 90s, that wasn't a thing. That didn't exist. The internet wasn't accessible to every person. I remember the dial-up modems at home coming into our house with these big, massive computers. And so you didn't even know it was in existence, that this was a thing you could do. And I was always told, and I have great parents, my mum was always my biggest fan and has been and still is to this day, that, do whatever makes you happy. But I didn't know how to answer that question in my late teens, early 20s.
You didn't know what made you happy?
I had no idea. All I knew, and it's really weird, because an interesting question is, if you can't start with what makes you happy, just start with what makes you unhappy and avoid that. Charlie Munger's a great line, if I just knew where I was going to die, I wouldn't go there. And I love that. I live by that philosophy. And when it came to entrepreneurship and teaching, I spent 4 years getting an undergraduate degree in business. I then did a postgraduate to become a teacher. And I walked into my first teaching job in a year 3 classroom in London because there was a shortage of teachers at the time. And I was about 30 minutes into my first ever job in front of 37-year-old children. And I thought, I don't want to be a teacher. I was like, what am I doing? I don't want to be a teacher. And to cut a very long story short, I came home that Christmas. I was really unhappy with my job. I hated it. And the problem is I was 23 years of age. I didn't have enough life experience. I thought if I went to do something else, I'd be a massive failure to everybody because my family, my friends, everyone knew I was going to be a teacher. There's a lot of teachers in our family. And I felt really misaligned with this job. I'm like, this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. So I came home that Christmas and I was having a real pity party for myself. I was like, I don't like London. I hate my job. And I was complaining and moaning to my mum. And she gave me a question that actually made it into my last book, Rewriting Your Story, in the chapter on Habit 5, have a reason to jump out of bed every morning. And she asked me the question, what would you do for free? And that was the first time ever I felt unstuck in that moment. And I thought, gym. I was like, if I was cleaning the floor in a gym, I'd be happy. I'm not happy with what I'm doing now. And fitness was, I played Gaelic football all my life. And gym was a huge part of that. I know you're saying your son is similar. He played soccer and then went into the gym. I was very similar. It was just Gaelic football for me. So the gym was a huge part of my life, a huge hobby and passion for me in general. And I thought I'd love to work in this space. So again, keeping that long story short, I signed up to a fitness instructor course in January of 2012. And when I walked into that classroom, which is a very basic instructor course, I had the complete opposite feeling.
As you did in front of the 7-year-olds in London.
Complete opposite. I went, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I was like, I have no idea what it looks like, but this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I ended up kind of falling into entrepreneurship. Now, I went broke twice. I made every mistake you can make when it comes to setting up a business, starting a business. I rented a gym in West London in Shepherd's Bush, which was the same rent as my accommodation in London. So regularly it would come to the end of the month and there was, not enough money for the end of the month. And I went broke twice. The second time was probably when I thought I was done. I remember trying to take out a £10 note from NatWest. I was with NatWest Bank, and the same as the Irish system here. If you've less than €10, you can't take money out of the account. And I needed to get to the bank so I could take out an overdraft to pay my rent that month. So I was down the back of my couch. I was living with 3 other teachers at the time, all single guys. I was so embarrassed. I waited until they all went to their bedrooms, and I was down looking for money in the couch so that I could pay for the bus to go to the bank to get an overdraft to pay my rent that month. And that's when I was like, I'm done. I'm not cut out for this personal training. This isn't going to work. And just by, I don't know, the universe, God, higher power, whatever it was, I got a substitute teaching job with my tail between my legs straight after that. And after about 3 weeks, one of the girls who was in the classroom beside me came over and said, I heard you're a personal trainer. I've got a wedding in 4 months. Will you train me? And I said, oh, sorry. I was like, I tried that. It's not something I do. I'm really not very good at that. And she goes, please, I'm too nervous to go to a gym. Will you please just take me? I said, okay, I'll take you in the park and I'll do some sessions with you, but I can't charge you. I was like, I'm a crap personal trainer. I can't charge you. So we went to those sessions. After about 3 weeks, I adjusted her nutrition. We did 2 sessions a week and she started losing weight. And she was like, look, I'm losing weight. I feel amazing. I'm on track for the wedding. Please take money. And I said, okay. And in that moment, I understood that I wasn't a bad personal trainer. I just didn't understand business, and that I was crap at business, not personal training. And something I tell a lot of people that I work in business coaching now and mentorship is there are 2 different hats you're wearing. The same as your financial side. That's a completely different side of your business, on your business versus in your business.
Yes.
We'll talk about later, I'm sure. But that opened up everything from that point onwards, because I now knew there was a gap in my knowledge about how to run my business. You see this all the time. I listen to all the podcasts. I'm on the Instagram page where you're filling in this gap with people about, your taxes and what kind of schemes are available for people and what kind of grants are available for people. These are unknowns. These are things you didn't even know about. You did an episode on the grants and for startup businesses that I've sent to 22 or 23 people, and I posted it on my story on Instagram because it's an incredible episode, like one that everybody should listen to who's in the early stage of a startup in a business. And that was something that was an unknown for me. I didn't even know those
Yeah,
grants
you
were
don't
available.
know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know. And I was the same with business. I knew how to run personal training sessions. I knew how to get someone in shape, but I didn't know how to get clients. I didn't know where to get the leads from. I didn't know how to convert those leads.
And when you realised that gap in your own knowledge, how did you fill that gap then?
Initially, it was books and podcasts. They helped a lot. And when I started to make more money, I invested in courses and mentors and business coaching. And that was a mixed bag. Some business coaches were some of the best investments I've ever made. I know you do this when you have an hour consulting with somebody, that they will go mind blown off the back of it. I've had that with business coaches. And I've had the opposite where I'm like, this was actually the biggest waste of money. Dumb taxes is what I call it. I'm like, that was a dumb tax I paid. I should have done more due diligence with that person, and I should have asked better questions, or I should have gone to an alternative coach who had different answers that was more aligned with how I wanted to be as a coach. And so I was able to close that gap. And then in 2012, 2013, 2014, for 2 years, I did both. I worked as a primary school teacher during the day, and I worked as a personal trainer at nighttime, on holidays and at weekends.
So you kind of put your toe in the water without dumping the good pensionable job.
And that was the fear, to be honest. Like, something I put in my second book, Rewire Your Mindset, and this is a thought experiment I still do to this day. What would you do, be or have, if you knew you couldn't fail? That's a mindset thought experiment that still helps me to this day, because the fear of failure is a very big thing. Fear of success is a big thing too. Yeah. What happens if I get the thing I want and I can't handle it? That was a big thing for me as I grew. But fear of failure was the initial thing I was struggling with.
Yeah.
That what will everybody think? What will everybody say? What will I do? How will I pay? Like, I didn't have a daughter at this point. I didn't have a family. I didn't have anything. So if I failed, it was on me.
Yes.
So that made it different. Everyone is in different situations and scenarios in life. But for me at the time, I had to weigh up, what is it that I want to do? And I actually thought, Paul, if I'm honest, I would do personal training always as a part-time thing. I never thought it would be a business. I thought it would be a little bit of a side hustle. But what started to happen in London was I was making more money as a personal trainer part-time than I was as a teacher full-time. So there was a little bit of confidence built from that and given from that, but also direct feedback. Look, I'm on to something here. There's, you know, I know we talked about when you started TikTok first, you thought it would go to one market, and then it came to the me's of the world, the entrepreneurs, the company and business owners. And that's what happens. You course correct and you pivot. I never thought this would be a full-time gig, and I decided in 2014 that I was going to make a go at it full-time. So I moved back to Ireland, back to Galway, the west of Ireland. I moved back in with my mum and dad. My sister gave me a old little Toyota Yaris, one of those cars that when you close the front door too hard, all four windows fall down. But it got me to and from the gym. Yeah. And I said, okay, it's January 2014. I'm going to give myself 6 months to make a go at this full time. And if I can't, I have a safety net that I'll go back on the teacher registry and I'll get a job for September. That was the contract I kept with myself. And what happened there was straight away having a plan B for me personally.
Having the safety net.
The safety net. And well, if I
allowed you to commit fully for that period of time.
Which is huge. It depends on your personality type. But for me, that safety net led to the thinking that, okay, if this doesn't work, I'm just going to be in the same position I was in anyway.
Yeah.
I've got a teaching degree. I've got my qualification. I can fall back on this. But it took off nearly from day one. Within 2 months, and this is before podcast, before social media, before any books, I started getting such great results with my clients, because although no one knew who I was, I had been coaching people for 2 years, so I had got very good at my craft. I knew how to train people. I knew how to set up their nutrition. I knew how to get them results. And as a result of that, I had to bring in other coaches underneath me to clear waiting lists. And then by the 6 month period, I had 2 coaches working underneath me. I was able to bump my price as a trainer. And then a year later, my daughter was born, and I decided we were going to pivot and shift things online so I'd have more space. And then in 26, we moved online full time. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Right. And I mean, you've kind of half answered one of the questions I had for you, but is so you were able to toe in your water entrepreneurship while having this backstop, as it were, that you could go back to teaching, as you say. And how did you finance that then at the time? Was there, did you have to rent a gym at that stage? Tell me how you financed this new business development.
I bootstrapped everything.
Right.
Everything. I've never taken out a business loan. I've never used financing in of any shape or form for the business. And I'm definitely not against it. If I had your podcast in 2014,
maybe you would have.
Maybe I would have. And I would have listened to that episode on getting back your PAYE and using that potentially to kickstart the leader enterprise, the Leos that you talk about.
Yeah.
I would have used those 100%.
Yeah.
Like, it's why I sent that episode to so many people. I didn't do that. I didn't know they were available. I didn't know they were a thing. So I bootstrapped everything more or less from day one. And because of that...
So do you think, if just in hindsight, I know it's hindsight, do you think you could have grown the business faster if you had taken advantage of Leo grants or whatever other grants or Sure or whatever is available today?
Probably, but I think it made me more financially literate that I didn't have it, because I had to do my accounts myself to make sure that there was enough coming in, and I knew exactly what was coming in and going out.
Yeah.
Everything from, the cup of coffee I spent to somebody paying me $2,000 for a group of training sessions.
Yeah.
I documented all of it.
Okay.
And
of course you did so because of your previous experience of not having the rent at the end of the month.
100%. Yeah. Too much month at the end of the money. That was a regular thing for me.
So, Brian, you mentioned there about the various grants, and thank you for the compliment on the podcast and the shares. It's brilliant to hear that. If you had those grants or tax reliefs available to you now, do you think you would have done anything different? Would you have financed the business differently, do you think?
Yeah, I would have 100% availed of them and used them if I knew they were available. I didn't have that information at the time. I didn't have that knowledge around it at the time. Now, in hindsight, it worked out really well, because the combination of having gone broke twice and then not having...
Twice bitten,
twice bitten,
twice shy.
Yeah. Third time, thankfully, it's worked out quite well. But in that regard, it made me a lot more mindful of tracking things. And I think if there was easy money available, I don't want to say easy money because it's yours if you're doing it correctly, and
yeah, it is.
And you'll pay it back in tax if it's a grant that you're getting. But because I didn't have a huge chunk coming in, it would come in, and we made a kind of a decent living from 2014 onwards, and then 2016 it really spiked. But from 2014, 2015, in those early days, I was really motivated to try and make it work then anyway. And I think even if I had 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 that was there, it possibly would have made me complacent. Again, hindsight's 2020, I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm happy the way it went, but if I was starting fresh in 2025, I would 100% buy
You'd be
myself
looking
that
for as
wooden-
much assistance as you could possibly
100%.
get.
Yeah.
Good. One of the things I just, as a slight aside here from where we are, I mean, I know that you're a motivational speaker, and one of the things that struck me is that, they say public speaking is probably the scariest thing a human being can do. As I said to you earlier, I think jumping off a bridge with an elastic band tied to your ankles is probably scarier, but there you go.
Unless you give it a talk on the way down.
Yeah, exactly. But in terms of motivational speaking, and speaking itself has been a way of you promoting yourself, I know, and a way of you developing your brand. The question, long-winded as I am, the question is, were you as scared as people say you would be about public speaking? And if you were, how did you get over that?
I love the line, and I don't know who it's attributed to, that the number one fear in life is public speaking, the number two fear is death. And I always find that as such a weird line. And I get it, like there's a whole evolutionary reason for this, that, if you were ostracized in your group back in tribal times 10,000 years ago, it led to death, and that's what it feels like when you're in front of people and eyeballs are on you. So this has been very well studied psychologically. But for me, I love public speaking now. It's actually one of my favorite things that I do. But in the early days, I actually got the fear out of the way earlier than most, because I was terrified of public speaking like everybody, but I started in secondary school because one of the things I did when I was 15 was I'd recognized I had this real paralyzing fear of being in front of crowds. And I signed up, and to this day I still don't know why, but I did. I signed up to narrate a school play in front of a couple of hundred people. And the whole reason I signed up to do that was because I'm like, I don't want to be afraid of this anymore. And I was 15 at the time, maybe 16. I was
an
young.
astute 15-year-old.
Yeah. I for some reason at the time, I remember thinking, I'm going to need this. I was like, I can't be afraid of this. And a weird thing happened in college and university then. I actually wrote about this a little bit in Rewrite Your Story, the last book, that when I did a marketing business undergraduate, and in my first year of college and first year of university, we would do a lot of marketing presentations. And a weird thing happened when we'd be preparing for those presentations. And I would have, normally in groups of 3 or 4, 2 girls and a guy, two guys and a girl, whatever it was in terms of the split. And I remember one in particular, I think it was my first or second ever presentation. And it was me and 3 of the girls that were living beside me at the time. We were all in the same course. And they were petrified before the talk. And this was only in front of about 30 people, 40 people. They were petrified. They were hands were sweating. They were shaking in the chair. And I was bouncing, ready to go. I was like, I can't wait. I was like, now it's time to show. And it was something that the closest thing to a secret sauce in business is try and find things that you find easy that other people find difficult. And public speaking became that for me. Podcasts are the same. I prepare a lot for my podcasts. We did a little bit of talking beforehand. I have my online business podcast for entrepreneurs that's no editing. I do one take and just straight through. So it's a skill that's crossed over into other areas, but it's something I find very easy. Now, I joked at the start of the podcast, if I had to edit an episode, I would have chucked it in at episode 3 because I don't even like tuning in a new television. Like that stresses me out. But I can speak for hours. I told you yesterday, I did a podcast batch day yesterday. I did 7 podcasts yesterday. I can do that because I love it. I think I'm decent at that communication style. It doesn't take a lot of mental effort.
I like the idea, though, of what you said there. I mean, I think that's a real nugget is, find what you're good at that other people don't want to do or aren't good at. Mm-hmm. And leverage off that, It's... feel what's that? There's a famous book, isn't there? Feel the fear and do it anyway.
Yeah.
I told you earlier that I lecture in a private business college from time to time, and I talk about this to the customer, to the kids in the college, and say there are predominantly 2 emotions. In humanity. I mean, there are lots, but there are 2 major ones, and one is fear and the other is greed. And fear, paralyzes us. Fear is the bunny in the headlights. Mm-hmm. It's not that it won't move, it can't move. And while evolutionary, not moving when a hawk is hunting you is a good thing, not moving when a Land Rover is coming towards you isn't a very good thing. So you've got this situation that the evolutionary benefit of stopping running when you're a bunny, as I said, no use to you in the modern world if you're in the middle of a highway. But greed, if fear paralyzes us, greed motivates us. And often, we move forward without truly investigating the ramifications of our actions properly. So hopefully, as I say, I think that's very, do what you're good at that other people don't like to do.
And we all have versions of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's the key point, isn't it? I mean, yours might be public speaking. Somebody else's is the podcast, editing and, development and all of that.
Yeah.
In business, you need all of these things often, and it's about finding the right people, isn't it, to help you out.
And not only that, something that I didn't know, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with the cognitive bias, the false consensus bias. It's where we think that everybody else thinks like us. We think about one thing and we assume everybody else thinks the same way. I always remember when I hired my tech guy who's been with me nearly 10 years now. Patrick's his name. And setting up a website, building out the back-end automation for programs, for newsletters. that makes me want to jump off a bridge with no bungee. Patrick loves that. He loves that. It's problem solving for him. And as an entrepreneur, when you're growing a business, you're actually doing a disservice to yourself and to others to not hire either full-time, subcontractor, freelancer for people who not only are better at that thing, but love to do that thing. Because that means then you can focus on the things that you love to do. Again, in the early stages, at the very start, it's tricky because you don't have the income, the revenue and the money. But maybe if you get some of these grants, you will. So again, bringing it back full circle. But that's something that's worth keeping in mind, because I just assumed everybody hated those things, but it's not the case.
Yeah. Earlier, when you were talking about your origins, and then your business was, you didn't use these words, but I think I'm right in paraphrasing, your business was swapping your time for money. And then you moved into the whole digital world, which is about monetizing, creating passive income. And first of all, was that a deliberate thing you did? And second of all, how have you gone about monetizing that brand you built up in the digital space?
Great question. Yeah, it was very intentional. It didn't start off online though, it started offline. One of the models that I actually thought I was going to build when I was a personal trainer was when I was training other trainers under my umbrella, and I had them down as Brian Keane Fitness coaches. And that was my first indirect way of having people make money, or me making money by leveraging other people. So one example was in 2014, the back end, I had 2 trainers in the gym. I was charging €100 per hour for a personal training session. I had my 2 trainers charging €50 per hour, and we were doing a revenue split, 25 each. So I was making €150 per hour in that gym, but I had 2 employees effectively, they were partners really, doing my programs with clients I had signed up. And so that was my kind of indirect way of leveraging and seeing that I don't actually have to be in the gym to make money. And then my transition online was I kept my trainers in the gym for those who wanted one-to-one personal training. And then I started to build an online business. So I was still making money while I was at home setting up online programs. And that got me very curious about multiple revenue streams, passive income. And passive income is a very funny one, with the exception, like you know this with finance, but in business, passive income isn't truly passive. If it's courses, programs, it can be scaled and leveraged, but you still have to, this podcast
you still have to create the content.
Exactly, to drive people back to the thing that is generating money for you, whether it's a book, a course, a program, etc. But it's as passive as it gets in terms of business. And I spent 2016 really dialing in that style. And my first 2 programs that I launched, one was my GA Lean Body program, which was for GA players who wanted to get stronger, fitter, faster, but also build up muscle, lose body fat, get a six-pack,
and quite a niche market, of course.
But I was first to market on that. That program crushed from day one. I'll never forget, 2017, we recorded an ad, which was an advertisement for the program, a 60-second video for Facebook that had over 1 million views within 24 hours. An organic ad for a program. And it was because people were sharing and going, oh my God, see what this guy is doing. And it was funny because I was that market. I was that person. Like I played under 16 with Galway. I was in with the minor setup. I was in with the under 21s for a little while. GA was my life. But I was also the person that wanted to look good at the weekends. I wanted to have biceps and a bigger chest and a 6-pack. And I remember when I was in the inter-county setup, I would ask my S&C coaches, look, how do I get a 6-pack and build my arms? And they'd look at me and scoff and be like, doesn't matter. That's not going to help you put the ball over the bar. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. And then I would go into the gym and I would ask the bodybuilders, how do I build muscle and get bigger? And they'd explain, you do hypertrophy and you lift this way and you eat this way. And then I'd say, will that make me slower or impact my performance for football? And they said, no idea. So all I did was I merged the 2 worlds together. I created a program that focused on body composition and made you fitter, stronger and faster. And that was a real first to market, first mover. That elevated everything. Like our first 6-figure year was in 2016. And it was because of that program, because we were able to scale that.
Yeah.
I knew the program pain points from day one because I was the avatar.
Yeah. You remind me of the transition, rugby transition from amateur to professional. If we look at rugby games from 25 years ago, they're all tiny. You know, I mean, and I remember Jonah Lomu being the first really big rugby player that I was ever aware of. That this tank of a bloke was out on the wing, you know, that he wasn't a prop forward who were the tanks. He was, so there was this fundamental shift, wasn't there, in that whole business. And sounds like you were at the forefront of bringing that to the new market, which was the whole digital area.
Timing and luck is definitely a thing here. You know, like I'm aware that there's the mindset that luck is when the prepared mind meets opportunity, and that's true. But there is an element of luck and timing.
And there's an element, yeah, you're right, absolutely. I mean, wasn't it? I think it was Gary Player, the famous South African golfer. Somebody said to him, you know, you seem to have been very lucky recently, Gary. And he said, the more I practice, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. But there is a degree of right man, right place, right time, or even wrong man, right place, right time.
100%. And fail forward.
Yeah.
Like the thing is, what's so interesting in business is, and I speak quite publicly about my failures and the mess ups and things and mistakes I've made, but it's kind of like venture capital. You can have 99 failures and one success, and that wipes out the other 99 failures.
Yeah.
I'm probably a walking example of that. You'll see the books, you'll see the programs, you'll see the revenue, you'll see the multiple businesses in terms of the fitness and the consultancy, but you don't see all the graveyard of ideas.
No,
that
you
were
don't.
failures.
It's you know, you're right. I think you mentioned Charlie Munger there, and I think another thing I saw him attributed to him recently is the only people who never fail are the people who try nothing. You know, he probably didn't say it quite that way, but being from where he is and stuff. But I mean, you just got to try, don't you? You got to get up and try, and failure is part of the process, isn't it?
Yeah.
We were talking about this earlier, and I was saying again about the students. You know, I often say to them, think of how you learn to ride a bike. Mm-hmm. You got on a bike, you fell off, you grazed your knee. You got back on the bike, you fell off, you grazed your knee, you failed. You learned a little. So tell me about I mean, you said there's a number of failures in your past, but what failure in your past taught you the most, and do you think is probably a contributor to your success today?
Definitely the one I mentioned earlier probably tops the list. The failure that I thought I was a terrible personal trainer when I was actually just bad at business. Yeah. That was really eye-opening for me, not because it put me on the right path, and it did. It was because it made me see problems differently. It made me see problems from different perspectives. And every time that I don't know something, or I'm unsure, or I have a perceived failure, something that, you know, failure in entrepreneurship, as long as it's not a death blow, you know, you can die in business in two ways. You can have a death by 1,000 cuts, make a lot of bad decisions, or you can have a death blow. You can do something really stupid and go to zero once. And reputation is the same. It takes years to build, seconds to destroy. So you need to be very mindful of that, particularly if we come on to building up a brand. But in terms of failure, every time now something doesn't go well, I reevaluate it. I also stole this from Charlie Munger, premortems. I will always do a premortem on an idea. Generally, you'll see people doing postmortems. Okay, why didn't that go well? Or why did that go well? Yeah. Picking out the successes, picking out the failures. I try and do a premortem. Like even when I write books, I'll go, well, what would be the pushback on this book? What will people say? Well, that's not going to help me. That's not true, or that's not useful. And then I'll try and write around that. Yeah, no,
I've never heard it called premortem before, but that's a good description. And I think I've said this before on one of the videos or podcasts we've done, but when I had a business idea in my early career, I'd always bring it to my father, and I brought it to him not to tell me why I was right. I knew why I was right. I wanted him to tell me why I was wrong. I wanted him to play devil's advocate. And that sounds a bit like your pre-mortem. That's what you're doing. You're saying, what's wrong with it? Don't tell me what's right with it.
100%.
I have a million ideas about what's right with it.
Yeah. There's a line, sorry to cut across you, Paul, that might be useful for people listening. And I think it's attributed to Darwin, if I'm not mistaken, because I read a lot on Darwin, Origin of Species. I'm a big reader in terms of trying to learn from other people's mistakes. And Darwin has a line that always stuck out with me, that you should try and argue other people's opinions better than the opinion you hold. And when he was coming up with the evolutionary theory around species and the origin of species, one of the things he tried to do was, why would people nitpick this idea?
Yes.
And then he would try and answer that question. It's basically just disconfirming your own belief. Richard Feynman, who I love, he's a former physicist, his line, don't fool yourself when you're the easiest person to fool. Like, try and remove yourself, like have a version of your dad, but that can be you. Yeah. What would I think about, how would I feel about this if I thought the opposite? Like, something that happens a lot, and I'm in the health and fitness space, and that's a very tribal space.
Yes.
Like, people are very carnivore, vegan, CrossFit, bodybuilding, fitness. It's very tribal. And if you think about it, and I've always used this analogy online, which probably ties into the brand, is if you think about carnivore and vegan, or any two opposing ideas, Democrat, Republican, etc., people are flinging rocks at each other. And if you think about yourself in the middle, you're taking those rocks and building up your own little house. Yeah. That becomes your personal brand. And that's something that I try to do along the way. And yes, you can be tribal, and that's a good way to build up brand as well. Get us versus them. You tap into the tribal element of what we've been hardwired to think. But also, if you want to be impartial and actually learn from the mistakes of everyone around you and build up your own little personal brand around that, you can take those rocks people are flinging and build up your own home. And that comes down to your thinking. That's down to the premortem. That's down to, how can I shift my perspective on this? How can I look at this thing differently? Yeah. And asking better questions. Well, I put everything through the filter of, what would this look like if it was easy? Yes. Asking those questions just shifts your perspective. Again, it's very mindset based, but a lot of entrepreneurship really is like, I find that very interesting what you say there, Brian, and particularly because I would counsel people on the financial planning side. Is, if you're going to do a business plan, if you're going to try and look into the future, which, let's face it, none of us have a working crystal ball. And, I often say to people, if I had a working crystal ball, I wouldn't be sat here talking to you, which is probably true. But I always say that you should under-promise and overachieve. You should run your numbers and then run your numbers again and say, if it was less than I expect, can I still keep the doors open? Can I still pay my bills? Would you agree with that? And do you apply that now in your business planning? I do. It's risk assessment 101. What's the upside? What's the downside? Can I handle the downside? And running things through that filter, whether it's financial planning or a new program or a course or a service that you're creating, it all runs through that filter. What's the upside? What would it look like in the best case scenario? What does it look like in the worst case scenario? Can I handle that worst case scenario?
Can you handle both of those events? Mm-hmm. Very good. We talked about earlier, it's obviously you've been brand building for quite some time. You've built a brand. And I had one particular question that I wanted to ask you, and that's about your affiliates or your marketing collaborations, because it's something that interests me personally, as well as I imagine interests listeners, and that is, when you're deciding on a collaboration with a third party, how do you protect your brand from them? Is that part of your risk analysis? Could they do something that would impact on my brand? And if they could, what damage might it do? How do you deal with that?
I ask the question, and I run all my brand partnerships and affiliates through this, is, would I promote this product for free? And if I promote it for free, I'll take money for it. And that eliminates actually 99% of things. Okay. If I'm being completely honest. And a lot of the brands that I work with, and full disclosure, this is a very, very, very small portion of my revenue. And I make decent money from brands and affiliates, but it's a very small portion of the revenue overall. Yeah. But
you could do without it
100%.
if you needed to.
I always think book royalties and brand deals are bonus territory. My courses, programs, services, they're 80%. I love the philosophy, eat what you kill. I don't want to be the slave of a brand. I had friends in 2020 during COVID who were influencers, and I had one girl who had to go back working online for a makeup company because all her brand deals stopped. And I never wanted that to be an issue for me. So I still run them through the filter of would I promote them for free, and if I promote them for free, I'll take money, which is, I know, very paradoxical, but it also means that if I wouldn't promote the brand, it doesn't matter. I remember I had a brand come in, I won't mention them publicly, but they had like a special water, I'm using inverted commas for those listening, that would help with fat loss. I'm like, it's water. I was like, it's water. All water helps with fat loss if you're dehydrated, and otherwise it's not a special magic cure. And I remember throwing back a ridiculous figure at them just to test the water. It was like 10K for 4 posts or something like that. And they're like, yeah, perfect. And I was like, no, just to test the water. I was like, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I was like, I can't move ahead with this. I was like, I see where your
Yeah,
marketing budget is going.
The answer is, if I do it for free, I'll do it for money. I think that's an excellent answer. If I can move just as we get towards the end of our time together, Brian, I'm particularly interested in your experience of the financial planning world. I mean, obviously, from your stories you've told us, you started with back of an envelope doing it yourself. But what has been your experience of the whole financial advice and financial planning world? Good and bad, maybe, over the years. And if you can tell me, what's the best piece of financial planning advice you ever received? And well, the opposite of that, what's the worst piece of financial planning advice you ever received?
Oh, I love that question. Without blowing too much smoke, I've got so much from your content, Paul. Like, it really connects, because I'm your avatar in terms of like high income earner, running my own business, etc. And I'm a big reader on financial markets, but 99.9% of the stuff out there is US based.
Yes.
So the best piece of advice I ever got was, it's going to sound so stupid, and it's true, is you're not in the US, you're in Ireland, which, we talked before we went on air about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, great book by Robert Kiyosaki. Great idea in terms of keeping your mindset open. But a lot of those rules don't apply in Ireland. And same with your ETFs, your investments, same as your stocks, the capital gains, all of that. It's not the same setup. So the best piece of advice I got, which was very basic, is you're not in the US, you're in Ireland. Very obvious and very silly.
So take your financial planning and advice in the Irish context only.
100%. The worst, it wasn't financial advice. It was not knowing where to go for my information. And so in 2015 to 2016, I might be getting the years wrong, but when we transferred and changed from sole trader to LLC, I got a massive tax hit, because I was working with an accountant at the time who didn't realize I was going to make as much money as I made, and had me down as a sole trader. And I assumed, this is another really stupid, dumb tax I paid. And some people will be listening going, Brian, you're an idiot. Others will be going, oh my God, I need to look into that. So I'm hoping it's for the latter. But I assumed my accountant, you have a great episode on making sure you're asking the right questions to a financial planner, financial advisor, accountant, and their roles and jobs. And at the time, I assumed my accountant would tell me, you're making so much money, you need to switch to an LLC or you're going to get a massive tax hit. And I can't remember if it was 2016 or 2017. It was around that time, 2015, 2016, when I was making a lot of money, when we made that kind of jump to 6 figures, but I was still a sole trader. So I paid whatever it was, 41% tax. And nearly half
PRSI and USC.
Nearly half of it was gone. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, Paul, I feel like it was a 52K tax bill. Right. And I remember just went straight from my account, gone. I had it, so it was fine. But I remember thinking, oh my God, that was such a stupid mistake. And I remember being really angry at my accountant first, but then I got really angry with myself, because I'm like, it wasn't my accountant's job. I wouldn't give out to my plumber for not fixing my electricity.
Yeah. Good analogy.
Yeah, and that kind of got me clearer. So it wasn't directly the worst advice, but it was something that
But it was a lack of advice.
It was a lack of advice and a lack of awareness on who to ask, who would be the right person to ask for that. So that's something that I experienced. I had as an experience that set me back. It was a bit of a blow. It wasn't a death blow, but it was really, it hurt my ego more than anything. I was like, I should have been smarter than that. That was my language at the time. But now I tell people the same. I work with people in consulting and businesses, and I'm like, fix this. This is who you talk to, a financial planner. financial advisor, accountants. I can't give you advice on those. That's not my job. I will tell you how to get leads, convert those leads, service, scale. I've got you for that. But these are the questions you ask these people. So it's actually been very serving now, several years on, but at the time it was very frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said it, didn't you, earlier about the grant system? You don't know what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And, it's there are so many legitimate ways of, minimizing taxation, which is, and probably listeners are sick of me saying this, but the greatest obstacle to you or me achieving any financial ambition is tax. And but the secret to tax minimization is planning. It's not, coming to me moaning and saying, oh God, the year is over, I've got a tax bill for 52 grand. Well, what can I do? Pay it is the answer. It wouldn't have been 52 grand to continue to use your figures there as if you had been a limited liability company, LLC, as you say. But, that's gone. You can't fix the past, but you can fix the future. That leads me to another financial question directly I have for you. You've talked about sole traderships, you've talked about LLCs. What other, or if any, business structures? Have you used onshore companies? Have you used offshore companies? Have you been in partnerships, have sole traderships? How do you structure your business now? Because I think when we were pre-recording, I think you told me there are a number of different businesses there now, aren't there?
We have everything under the same LLC. So yeah, we've got our fitness business and we've got our consulting and business mentorship, but we still run everything under the LLC.
So you run them as different divisions of
within it, yeah, silos within the same LLC.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of you therefore have the same advisors around those because it's all under the one.
Yeah.
Okay. And longer term, I mean, what are your hopes and dreams for the future then in terms of what's all this for? I mean, you talked about your daughter, and I believe she's 9 years of age. We share that in common. I have a 9-year-old daughter. What are your hopes for the future? Are you doing this to sell your empire down the line? Are you doing this to go home and let it send you the money? Or are you doing this for your little girl? What's your long-term motivation?
It's interesting. It's a great question. I've always said, and I preach this on my business podcast, the online business podcast, that I always wanted to build a business I didn't want to retire from. And I'm in a very fortunate position. I always said from the early days, I wanted to be financially free by 40. I'm getting close to that. I haven't quite got to the point where my assets pay my liabilities, but I'm not far off it. I'm hoping to have my mortgage cleared by this year. I don't have any car payments. I've got an executive pension fund set up through my LLC, which I might be changing off the back of this after talking to you with another podcast and stuff. And that's because I wanted to have a freedom so I could spend time with my daughter. Now I have that now. Like, it's interesting. You rhymed off a lot of things I do, and I am quite good with time management, business management, energy management, but I work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, half day Friday, off weekends. And I spend a lot of time with my girlfriend. I spend a lot of time with my daughter. I spend a lot of time with my family. I get to do really cool things. And that's down to the systems that I've set up in the business. Could I make multiple 7 figures if I worked 80 hours a week? Yeah, 100%. I know how to do that. I know the systems, but
that's not your priority.
I don't want that life.
Yeah.
I don't need it. It's weird. Like 2016, 2017, I can't remember what the growth was from like 100K to 200K or whatever it was. But I remember thinking I made an extra hire. I remember thinking my life hasn't changed one iota here. And I had a little bit of a wake up that more money doesn't equal success for me. Personally, this is such a subjective thing.
Yeah, well, success is a feeling, isn't it? It's not a bank account.
Exactly, 100%. Yeah. And what I didn't know then, as someone that didn't have a lot of money growing up and went broke twice, is money doesn't solve all your problems, but money will solve all your financial problems. And having your financial problems solved will give you a lot of freedom and reduce a lot of stress. And when that stress is reduced, you can do more things that you love. That's not to be understated. That's massive. That's huge. It's why I love your podcast and your show. It's why people listen. But there is a number. You talk about this in terms of what's your number? What's your financial freedom number?
Yes.
But there's also a revenue number in your business that once you hit that tipping point, it's like training. I used to do bodybuilding shows. I used to do ultramarathons, really long distance, extreme 100-mile ultramarathons, multi-day ultramarathons. There's a point in training when training goes from fun to a chore, where it feels like, I'm not enjoying this anymore. Business is the same. There's a point in business when working extra goes from fun to a chore, and the extra revenue, and if you want the Lamborghini, the Porsche, the Ferrari, by all means, amazing. Go and do that. If that's what your driver is.
If that's your thing.
If that's your thing. It's not my thing. So me doing more and burning myself out doesn't really help anything. Like the extra money, I have enough.
Yeah.
I'm in a very fortunate position of somebody that has enough and doesn't have to worry about money, which is an incredible thing to be able to say. Yeah. I'm still really interested in it and curious in it, but it feels more like a game now. And, you know, Naval Ravikant has a great line that you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. Like, if I play the game of just trying to earn more money at the cost of relationships, my health, my well-being, my stress, there's a point when it becomes a chore versus fun. And I'm just always mindful of staying in that point that I love what I do. I get to make really good money doing it. I don't want to retire from it because of the balance that I have. And that's something that sometimes surprises people when they see the outside, because they see content and podcasts and books and courses and programs and multiple businesses, when in reality, I have systems in place that allow me to do all those, and I will scale it back if it's pulling from other areas of my life. Right. And that's an important thing. That might not be true for everybody.
No, I mean, it is different for everybody, isn't it? Can I just? I've one final question for you, if I may, and that's around the original financing. Again, just go back in time for me. What tax breaks have you availed of over the years? You talked to me about your retirement scheme, for example. That's obviously one. Are there any others you can tell us about that you think have been beneficial to you, that might be beneficial to either entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs that are listening here now?
Embarrassingly, that's probably the only one that I've fully utilised. And again, coming back to, you started the podcast, I think, in summer 2024, and I've been following the Instagram page since. Part of the reason I haven't availed of a lot of these things is lack of awareness. Like I buy the Money Doctor book every year. I'll read that, I go through it. But outside of that, and I've searched podcasts and YouTubes for Irish investing ETFs, and there's a couple of videos up there. So, and the same with everything when it comes to the Irish market. And it's kind of like banging your head against the wall. And that's how it felt before I came along your content. You can only bang your head so often off the wall where you're like, I'm just going to stop banging it. Because I was searching for stuff and kept getting US-based answers. And I was like, I'll just put it into the executive pension fund. I was like, it's fine. I'll just run the business, pay the tax. It's fine. And you say that, like, you have to pay tax, but you shouldn't pay more tax than you need to. Exactly. I love that line. And now it's why I've been binging your show and your content, because I have gaps in my knowledge on this, and I'm not the best one to ask for people because I haven't availed of these things. But part of the reason why I'm binging the content is because it's something that I do want to avail, that if you ask me in 2 years' time, I'll say, Paul, I'm doing this, this and this based on what I've heard.
Yeah. Well, and I think, you know, our certainly core message, as you kind of paraphrase there yourself, is that you have a right to pay as little tax as legitimately possible. But only you can exercise that right. No, you know, there's a bit like the revenue won't rack up to your house in Galway, knock on the door and say, by the way, Brian, did you know you could do this, or did you know you could do that?
Great if they did, though.
Yeah, it would be nice. It'd be nice. It's not going to happen, though, I don't think. But, you know, there are legitimate. And I suppose the other thing to say is, you mentioned the John Lowe's book, The Money Doctor book. And, you know, it's worth saying that tax rules change every year. It's called the budget. And it's imperative for business owners and entrepreneurs to have somebody in their corner who tells them of the changes. And that isn't the atypical financial advisor, because as you and I talked about before we start recording, that advisor is paid to sell a set of pre-packaged products. Now, that's fine, As long as we understand that's the case. You know, people are paid to sell us Volkswagens, people are paid to sell us T-shirts. We have no problem with that. But, you know, who do you pay to keep you informed? And if I can give one message to the entrepreneurs and would-be entrepreneurs out there, it is that you need somebody in your corner who is paid to keep you informed. Whether you take advantage of the tax breaks or not is not the issue. Knowing that they exist and knowing how they can be applied to your circumstance is of paramount importance. Brian, it's been great to meet you today. Thank you very much for coming along. I have no doubt that we'll have a whole bunch of questions for you after this that I should have asked you, and maybe there's another event in the future where I can do that. But for now, thanks for your time today, and thanks for your openness and honesty.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.